If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you know that I generally stay away from, for the most part, gear talk. That is, the latest new camera out today. Because I think well, first of all, there's a lot of that out there. But also as a photographer, as a business owner, we are constantly hit with advertisements by people that want to sell us things. And what we really need to do is figure out what works for us, what we need, and what will benefit our business. That's what this video is going to be about. I want to thank my sponsor, Found. They are a banking application. They're designed specifically for solo entrepreneurs and small businesses. And we'll talk a little bit more about them later, but let's get an idea of what we're going to talk about here. First, we're going to talk a little bit about determining what kind of gear we need. That includes cameras, lighting, studio equipment, software. Then we're going to talk about setting up budgets and an idea of how we can actually get what we need. Then I'll break down a little bit more specifically about different types of gear for different types of work, just in case you're unsure. And finally, we'll go into a little bit of software and that kind of thing. So stick with me here. We're going to talk about how we can get the most out of our gear purchases and get in the black. I want to take a minute to talk about my sponsor, Found. Found is a banking app designed for solopreneurs and small business owners. They offer everything solopreneurs need in one convenient place, and I found them a great fit for photography businesses. One really useful feature, considering this video topic, is the Pockets feature. This allows you to create various compartments within your bank account for business needs and saving goals. Found comes with the taxes pocket by default, which allows you to put aside a certain amount of your income for your estimated taxes. You can create other pockets for things like second shooters, other contractors. We talked about photo assistants in a previous video. And of course, you can set aside a pocket for things like purchasing gear and software, other equipment, stuff like that. As you might expect from a banking app designed for solopreneurs, Found makes it super easy to create invoices for any of the jobs you're bidding on. It's an incredibly clean and easy interface to use, and you can be paid via credit or debit card, direct deposit, Cash App, and more. As creators, we want to create, so having a single app to handle all your banking needs keeps us focused on our craft. Check the description below, you'll find a link there to sign up for free. It really only takes a few minutes to sign up, and I encourage you to check it out. Now that you have a way to set aside money for new gear, let's see what to purchase. One of the most important things that we need to learn as small business owners is to understand the difference between our needs and our wants. That is to say, you might want the giant 7-foot Elinchrom octagon softbox, but you might not need it. So what we want to do when we're starting to think about budgets is really consider what it is that we need. Now, most of us will start off with a camera. So that can be very helpful because you're already somewhere, though you may not be in the right kind of camera, let's say, for what you want to do. So that might be something you have to budget for. But what I want you to do, and again, this can be tricky, but it's something we have to consider when we want to go into this more professionally, is decide what types of work that you are likely to do. Types of work you want to do, but also are likely to do. That is to say, if you live in the middle of the desert, you probably are not doing underwater ocean photography. Maybe you are, but it doesn't seem likely. So perhaps you're not buying that underwater gear. But if you are out in the middle of a desert with beautiful, bright sun that you have to fight every day, you might need overhead silks to control the light. You might need portable flash. You might need various filters like polarizers to be able to work in that environment. If you are a portrait photographer, you may want a fisheye lens, but it may be more practical for you to get a mid-range zoom, which is more common for portrait type work. You may want any number of things, but what we want to do is start trying to decide what it is that our niche requires. What's the minimum thing? If you're hired to do that type of job, what is it that you would need to pull it off? So let's start with something simple. Let's say a wedding. Not that weddings are simple, but if you're doing a wedding, you could think about it and say, well, you could shoot it all natural light, but I would guarantee that the vast majority of wedding photographers also carry some artificial light. You'd need a camera with a couple of different types of lenses to cover the different, your wide, big group shots. You'd need a bit of a longer lens to shoot from, let's say, the back of a group. If there's a ceremony, you might want a lens that can shoot details. This might be one lens that could do all of this. That's just a more, high-end lens, right? You might want some type of flash to light up the whole room, but minimally, you probably want some kind of flash, at least at the camera position, so that you can control the light a little bit. Maybe a reflector. These are things that would be minimal to that type of work. Staying similar, right? Let's look at being a portrait photographer. When I first started shooting headshots in New York City, natural light was the rage. So I would shoot everything basically outside in the park. What did I need for that? I needed a reflector, basically, and obviously a camera with a long-ish lens. I could find a spot in the park where I could, again, in the city, make it seem like nobody was in the background, keep the background nice and out of focus, let the person look good, have a little reflector for kick-in. That's the minimum. But what did I bring? I had a very large, like a king-size white sheet that I used to lay on the ground in front of the person as my kind of kick-up reflector, and I'd put them under something like a tree so they were in the shade. Sometimes, if it was the right time of day, I'd get a nice backlight coming in. Beautiful, right? That was great if I was in the park. If I was on the street, I had some areas already planned out where I could actually get under scaffolding to kind of do the same kind of shade thing, and I had a reflector. They actually make similar things now that look like, but anyways, I had a reflector made out of 2 pieces of foam board. That was the best thing ever. You could open it up like a sandwich, hold it like this under them, shoot with an 85, and it was beautiful. It took me time to figure out what I needed, because that's because though natural light was in and people wanted environmental shots. Over time, it evolved into people wanting clean white background shots in the studio. Well, in order to do that, I needed light to light the background, I needed light to light the subject. You get the point. Depending on what you're doing, depending on what the trends are, depending on what people are using, you will need different things. The important thing to consider is, what is it that I need to do the work I do? And keep in mind that if you are in a position like I am in New York City, but you probably are unless you're really rural, you might be in the position to rent things. And renting can be a great option when you're first starting, especially for things you don't need that much. Once we have an idea of the type of gear that we might need, what would be ideal for our business, what types of work that we're going to do, the next step here is to prioritize our purchases. It's always easy to go after the new shiny, oh, that 1.2 lens, oh, that new camera body. But what we really want to do is think about what is going to benefit us immediately, what we need to do the projects that we have on, slated or that we're hoping to get, and what will be the most beneficial to us long term. You might want that 1.2 lens, but if you shoot primarily in the studio stopped down, that might not be the first thing we buy. So for budgeting, what we want to do is put aside a certain percentage of what we make each job towards our general equipment purchases. This will help us stay covered if we need something in a pinch or if something breaks down. We can also tap into this for rental if the job doesn't pay for it, which hopefully we can get that in our estimate, which we talked about in another video, but if not, you might want to tap into that there. Other times though, we may buy something spontaneously. It has been more than once in my career where I've bought a fairly expensive piece of equipment effectively to do a job and made almost nothing on that job. Why? Well, because I knew it'd be something I'd use over and over again and something that I could charge the client for in the future. So the best example of this, which I may have talked about before, but when we used to shoot tethered all the time to phase 1 backs, we would always rent a computer. That's just what people did. You rented the back, you rented the computer. So I decided to just buy a computer. I bought an iMac, actually, so it had the built-in screen and everything. And the cost of this iMac basically cost roughly what it would have been to rent the computer for that first job, maybe a little bit more. And then I had that job multiple times throughout. I think I shot with that client at least 10 more times using that iMac. So if we look at that, that was a great purchase. Instead of taking 5 or 6, 7, 8 times, putting a little bit of my budget away, then finally buying it, I got it up front because I knew it would pay for itself. But it wasn't a random piece of equipment I just wanted. It was something I knew I used, and I didn't buy it the first time they hired me. I had already worked for them for over a year doing these various jobs, which meant I could have bought it a long time ago. But, I really had to think about it. Other times I've done that for lenses. I once got a contract to shoot a lot of musician portraits. A lot of those were in very small spaces. So since I had a contract and I knew I was going to make X amount of dollars, I upfront bought a lens. And that way it was a wide angle lens, so I could shoot in these small spaces to improve my work. The first couple of times I worked for them before I secured the contract, I rented the lens. So we have to think about budget like that. Do we want to slowly build up to something we eventually want to get, like the latest camera body that doesn't immediately benefit us, but that will be something we'll need eventually because cameras eventually wear out, right? We don't want to use a camera till it wears out. We really want to never have that happen to us. But it can. Or it's something that we need for a specific job or something that we just want because we think it will improve the work that we do. Figure out what it is exactly that we need/want for the process that we're doing, and then determine in a priority order what those things are. Make yourself a wish list. Write down the gear, the software, the computers, the studio space, whatever it is that you think that you eventually want to have in your business, list that down. And then try to prioritize it by how quickly it will make back what you put into it, how quickly it will make you more money than you're making now. And depending on that, move it closer to the top of the list. Every once in a while, refer back to this list. Every 6 months or so, I look at my list. Yes, I still have a list after over 20 years. And I look at my list and I move things around. And I think, okay, this was higher on my list before, but now that I look at it, this piece of gear right here will really help me. So that's what I do. I'd love to know what you guys do. Let me know in the comments below. All right, let's hit the 500-pound gorilla in the room. Cameras and lenses. Okay, so what do we need? Cameras for photographers are like chocolate for most people, or coffee for me. They're something that we just love to have. We want it around. We want to experiment with it. We want to have it all the time. We want all of them. But the reality is that we probably don't need all the camera that we desire. So what we want to do is consider, what do we need camera-wise? So I would say that think about the work that you have and what you need to deliver, and that will help you determine the megapixels that you might need. Second, consider that you're going to need 2 cameras almost certainly. And that's the most boring thing in the world, to buy 2 exact same cameras because one is just a backup, but that's what you need. When you are working commercially, you're going to want to, if something goes wrong, be able to pull out a backup. You're going to want to rotate between 2 cameras so that if during the shoot something happens and you don't notice it, every shot won't be bad, right? We're going to want to have at least 2 cameras that we're going to work with. And when you're first starting, that might mean that you have to buy 2. They don't need to be identical though. They just both need to be up to the minimum standards of what you're doing. That is to say, if I have, let's say the cameras I use right now, if I have a Nikon Z6, and I'm saying I want to get into photography, I might then buy a Z6 II, and the Z6 becomes my backup. The Z6 is good enough for most of what I'm doing. Is it as good as the 2? No. But later, when the 3 comes out or whatever, or the 4 or 5 or 6, then you get rid of the oldest one, you keep replacing it. That's what a lot of photographers do. Though, as I said, some people just buy pairs of cameras. It really depends on your budget and what you're doing. If you're shooting something like a wedding, I'd probably want to have 2 matching cameras because you're likely to use both cameras at the same time, with different lenses on them. Whereas if I was a portrait photographer, I'm probably not using, in this same exact setup, 2 cameras. I'm probably shooting one setup with one camera, switching to the other camera. So it's not, you're not going to have this like mid-roll weirdness. Mid-roll, you can tell I started with film. So whether you want mirrorless or a DSLR, whether you want super long lenses, whether you need wide lenses, whether you need zoom lenses, that's really going to depend on what you do. But I will say, think about having the least amount of gear that you need to do the job in a professional manner that you want to do, and then expand from there. Not to say you should only have the minimal amount of gear. It's nice to have that little gem of a lens in your bag that you pull out like 3 times a year, but that's not where you need to start. That's something you can add later. So as some of you may know, before I started doing videos for Adorama, and then eventually here, I was brought in as a professional photographer to be what they called the lighting consultant. They wanted a pro to be on hand to help people design their studios and figure out primarily lighting and grip. Because the camera salesman knew enough about the cameras to say, hey, megapixels, but lighting is a little bit more in depth than that. I'm waiting for the camera people now to make comments about how cameras are complicated. But anyways, that was my first kind of experience with basically interacting with strangers, if you will, and helping them build out their studios. And what I can tell you is the vast majority of the people, probably you, put all their money into cameras and lenses, because they've heard many people on YouTube and everywhere else say the most important thing is lenses, second most important thing is camera bodies, spend all your money. So you've got $3 or $4, $5, $6, $7, $10,000 to spend to start your photography business. You buy a bunch of really fast, cool lenses and a camera, and then you go, okay, I need to get some other stuff, and you've got $500 left, and you're like, what kind of light can I get? Now, depending on the work you do, that might be fine. If you are a street documentary photographer, on some level a photojournalist, some other types of documentary photography, if you're a landscape photographer, you may not need much else besides the camera and lenses to get started. But most photographers that do kind of more generalist work or commercial work need some kind of lighting and other types of tools. So we're going to dig into that a little bit here. There's going to be stuff for all different budgets, and that's what you have to remember. Don't be fooled by the people that tell you that the less expensive gear is just as good. But also don't be fooled by the people that tell you if you don't buy the best, you might as well buy nothing. Neither one of those two things is true. What we have to do is look at our budget, look at our needs, and know that eventually we may need to replace what we buy with something better. So one thing I'm going to suggest right from the very beginning, and this is for all photographers, I can't imagine a type of photography that wouldn't want this, and that's a tripod. It's the last thing we think of until we need one, but a tripod is such an essential piece of gear, and it's the kind of gear that if you get a decent one, not the most expensive, but a decent tripod, it will last you your career. I have been doing photography for more than 2 decades. I have bought 3 tripods, I think, in my time. I have a bunch of tripods because some were given to me, and I use them when I have multiple cameras, but realistically, I had a very cheap tripod when I very first started shooting, and I didn't have any money, so I bought like a cheap kind of plasticky tripod, which broke after a year or two. I bought a nice Bogan tripod, which probably, by today's money, like a $400 or $500 tripod, but I got it used, and I had that for well over 10 years and used it constantly. I put 4x5 cameras on it, medium format cameras, small format. It was an amazing tripod. I still have it up in my loft. And again, I've done a million videos on this, so I'm not going to particularly point out different types of flash, but consider this. When you're looking at your budget, how often are you on location? How often do you need to be running around with the light and moving it quickly? Those are going to factor into some things as far as size and battery, right? If I always shoot in the studio, I have a studio set up, I do portraits, I'm right here, everything's in one spot, I do product. I don't need to spend the money for battery-powered lights. You can step down and get non-battery powered. I don't need to spend the money for, let's say, TTL lights because I can take my time to set up my exposure properly. If I'm shooting events, I'm probably going to want a flash that goes on top of my camera, something very small. If I'm shooting somewhere in between location fashion, location portraits, I might want a more powerful light that's battery-powered and TTL for speed. So figure that out. Figure out what works best for you. You don't always have to buy the battery-powered TTL top-of-the-line brand if what you do is studio product photography. Get something decent with consistent color, get some power, let it plug into the wall. Easy as that. Start simple with modifiers. Softboxes these days are pretty inexpensive, so I would start with some kind of softbox, some kind of umbrella, and build from there. You don't need beauty dishes, you don't need all this other stuff until you know why you need it. And if you need it, you'll know. Finally, as I said, depending on the type of work you do, you might want some kind of constant light, but know that you're not necessarily saving money by going constant light. A good, powerful constant light is going to be pricey. So if you are doing video and you need to be able to have strong coverage, like light up a space with windows behind somebody, you're going to need to spend some money on some lighting. If you just want a little fill light in the eyes when you're running around doing events, then a small one on top of the camera might be fine. Again, think about what you do and buy the lighting accordingly, but know this, if you rely on natural light only, then that means that you will have to, by the nature of it, either create images that are not as high quality as you want all the time, or be moving around and be flexible with your schedule. That is to say, the first thing what I mean is, not that natural light isn't high quality, but if I usually shoot under a bright sunny sky, but go under a tree and I get this beautiful light that bounces around, it's beautiful. Well, if it's raining, or it's nighttime, or it's the winter, because I live in the Northeast, you're not going to have as much time or the ability to do that, right? Which means that you're going to have to either, if they have to have the shot today, you're going to have to compromise. If you're willing to compromise, though, you are willing to compromise. If you are flexible, that might work, but your client might not be. If they're a business person who has this much time, they don't want to have to keep being rescheduled. Having some kind of light that you can control is pretty essential as a photographer. What you need depends on what you do. So again, check out the other videos on this channel and other ones I've done for Adorama for different types of lights. Let me know in the comments below if you want more specific videos about different types of lights, comparing them, because we can do a bit of those, but not brands. The final element here that I want to talk about is computers and software. So again, depending on what you're doing, you may want to have, let's say, a laptop computer like this one that's portable. Perhaps you go on location and you tether, like I do. But you might be someone, I used to have a studio mate that would shoot portraits in studio, and they were the kind of person that sold prints and books and stuff. And what they would do is they would actually, well, they started off with a very large monitor, and then they went to a projector, right? What they needed as far as the computer was the ability, first of all, they shot into the camera. They didn't shoot tethered. Then they spent some time while the client was, drinking water and touching up to kind of quickly only pick the best ones and throw them up on the screen. That's a much different thing than me, who's doing a fashion catalog where I'm tethered into the computer the whole time with the client over my shoulder going, okay, we got it, right? Much different. So I'm considering a different computer system because of what I do. I use a laptop because I'm often on location. Even though I have this studio, I share it with multiple photographers. So I shoot here, and then I go back to my home studio, office as it would be, and do my editing there. With one computer, keeps my life simple. That's my needs. Your needs might be completely different. Insofar as software is concerned, the easy thing for most people to consider is, let's just jump into Photoshop, right? Photoshop is the king, right? But really consider what type of editing you do to your images. If you're basically just tweaking contrast and color grading, if you will, and doing minor touch-ups, you might be better off with just shooting into Capture One, like I do, and using either some kind of software package that does some instant cleanups, or taking the time to do individuals depending on your needs. I found that much more efficient than the Adobe suite. I used to use Adobe, no more. I find Capture One works for me, and some other small software that I've talked about before on this channel. I'll put some links. But if you're somebody who does a lot of layering, a lot of retouching, a lot of compositions, like if you're a product photographer, is where you see this a lot, food, you're going to want to use Photoshop because it is the king, right? It's the most powerful, and you'll want that. The same is true for any of the other software that you have. I use Canva quite a bit, which is an online software package that allows you to do layout. That's how I do my thumbnails. I use LumaFusion for my editing of my videos. I don't use Premiere because Premiere, again, is more than I needed. You don't have to have the top of the line piece of software if you are not doing that type of work. Keep that in mind. I'm not saying to go cheap and just use free stuff all the time, but also don't think I need to pay all this money to have the full Adobe suite because that's what professional photographers use. Think about what works for you and get it as you need it. If you need Photoshop, get it. If Affinity works for you, use that. If GIMP works for you, that's also fine. If you barely retouch at all, then maybe Capture One alone is all you need. And there you go. I think that's my talk on software. Other software, obviously, found, sponsored this video. I think software to do your accounting is useful. Software to do your invoicing and stuff, which is combined there, is super useful. You might want some kind of scheduling software. I use a simple calendar, but if you do things like have automatic scheduling, you might want to look into that kind of software. All of this is going to be part of your business. The little things you don't think of. This is your business plan. This is the stuff that you need. So think about how you interact with your client, how you send estimates and invoicing, how you keep in touch, maybe with a mailing list. How do you do promotional stuff? Do you want to do InDesign, or is Canva fine for you? Think about what works for you. I would say start with the free stuff and see how that works first, and then build your way into the more powerful suites as you know you need them. My goal with this video was to pack as much information in as little time as possible to give you an overview of how you can budget to build your business and get what you need. Hopefully you got that from this. But I want to see a lot of questions in the comments, a lot of advice in the comments. If you have been building up your business or your photography hobby over time and you have techniques that you've used for budgeting, please share them with everyone else. That's what this channel, that's what this community is about. Speaking of community, be sure to join my Discord server, and there's a lot of great people over there talking photography and other things. Also, check out Found. I will put a link in the description below. You guys can sign up. A lot of the stuff there is free, so you can kind of test drive it and see what works for you. I find it to be great software. Maybe you will too. I'll talk to you soon.